I'd like to share with you today some of the challenges that I think we have been less than forthright among ourselves as leaders and among club leaders that small clubs present to Rotary, but mostly to themselves. But my suggested challenge is if your club is over 25 members, think about a goal where you grow your club by 10 members or 10%. You take your choice. On the other hand, if your club's under 25 members, my suggestion is you think about a goal of growing to 25, or if 25 is so far away that you can't see it from there, close the gap by half between where you are and 25 members. What is the difference between these clubs above and below 25 members? I think 18 minutes from now, you'll be experts in that. Here are some membership profiles of Rotary clubs from my district. These are real clubs, and these are 5-year membership windows. Here's a club that managed its way down from 22 members to 13 members over the course of 5 years. Now, I say managed its way because these club leaders made the decisions, invoked the strategies, executed the actions necessary to reduce this club from 22 to 13 members over that 5 years. Here's another one. Now, this doesn't look bad. 17, they flirted with 20, but then 2 presidents in a row ignored membership, and they got themselves down to 13. Now, if you looked at statistics like this in nature and looked at these populations, what would you ask yourself? What does this look like? To me, this looks like an endangered species. Let me explain a little further. Here are 2 more clubs, 22 to 12, 23 to 17. Notice this pattern, and interestingly, look at the top one. That 22 to 12 would be a straight line, 2 members per year, and there's something magical about that. In all this data that I've looked at across 900 Rotary clubs, there's something magical about 2 members per year, and that is that it seems to be within the threshold of pain. Most Rotary clubs can just shake off a 2-member-a-year loss, excuse themselves for it, and then, of course, next year it's lather, rinse, repeat, and it's down 2 more members. That's how you get from 22 to 12 over 5 years. Chances are this club was at 32 the 5 years before. Here's another one, 23 to 15. You're starting to notice a pattern here. What do you suppose the next 5 years looks like after this? Here's what that looks like. It looks like lights out. And my district has dropped, on average, 1 Rotary club every other year for as long back as I've got data. And in fact, we broke that streak for about 3 years running, and then it caught up with us in the past 24 months. We've dropped 3 Rotary clubs, and every single one of them went down exactly the same glide path, and almost all of them at about the same rate. It's just almost frightening. Now, when we're talking with small clubs about this, don't give them the impression that we're picking on them. Don't give them the impression that we don't appreciate them. It's not true that small clubs can't serve their communities. They do. It's not true that they can't support the Rotary Foundation. They do, and most of them, because of the smaller denominator, they have exemplary per capita giving records to the Rotary Foundation. The problem is loss of sustainability, loss of critical mass. And here's how that goes. You slip below a critical mass of about 20 members, which, as you know, is today's threshold for chartering a club. There's a reason for that. You drift down to 18 to 16 to 14, usually over about 3 years. It's so slow, people don't even realize what's happening. They come into a meeting and look around, and there's a chair empty that was filled 6 months ago. Oh, well, yeah, another one bites the dust. Then you start having meetings of 10 or 12 members, and you start trying to attract speakers to speak to a group that size. And most of them say, you know, I don't know if I want to take the time. Then you have trouble attracting new members. Somebody comes and visits your club, looks around at this assemblage of 8 or 10 or 12 people and says, I thought this was Rotary International. What is this about? Where's everybody else? You also have trouble executing meaningful projects. The 80-20 rule applies. Whether you're at 16 members or 160, it'll still be about 20% of the people that show up and actually help out. The other thing that is interesting about most of these clubs is that they have few members under 50, and many of them are just aging out together. It's just a slow walk up the median age curve at literally 1 year per year median age. Now at 10 or 12 members, something interesting happens. At 10 or 12 members, a Rotary Club goes nuclear. And by that I mean you get down to one proton and one neutron holding this thing together. And at that point, the next thing happens, which is life happens to one of those, and it's lights out. Now, in each of these clubs that we've watched fail in this district over the last dozen or so years, I could tell you the name in advance of the person that something was going to happen to, and the club would fold. The most recent one was a couple. It was a couple holding the club together, and they're down to 12, 14, something like that. They decided to move closer to their kids, left the club. It wasn't 60 days until that club was on its back. Now, I noticed this in 2014-15 before I became governor, and here's the data. Of the 10 clubs in my district with the largest percentage membership loss in 2014-15, 9 were under 25 members, and those 9 clubs alone accounted for a net loss of 30 members. Is this frightening or what? We started paying attention to this. In fact, that's what this original material was created for in 2015. 2015-16, the 16 clubs under 25 members had a net gain of 18 members. This can be fixed, but it takes focus and it takes clarity. It doesn't have to be this way, folks. Here's a club that got itself down to 22 members. A new sheriff came to town, in this case, a business owner, looked at this and said, guys, this is not sustainable. We can't stay on this track. He grew that club about 30% in that 1 year by about 10 members from 22 to 32, then stayed on as membership chair for the year following his presidency and continued to propel that club northward. And that's important because when you add a lot of members, like say 10, what you realize is that you're right in the target zone of our highest attrition rate, which is members with 1, 2, or 3 years tenure. But here's another club where they took a surge like that actually on the basis of a challenge. I challenged the president-elect when we met at PETS. I said, Charles, couldn't we get this club back to 40 members like it used to be? And he said, well, I suppose so. And then about 9 months later into the year, I said, Charles, where did you find all these people that wanted to join your Rotary Club? He said, we asked them. So they grew that club up to a pinnacle of 43 members, and then the lack of a sustained ongoing membership effort, they lost some ground to 39, but still a whole lot different story than 28 5 years before. Now here's one. This one doesn't look all that interesting, unless you know the backstory. The backstory is that this club recovered from 14 members. This is a club that my own club chartered. We chartered them, we turned around, we walked away. They lost their charter president literally in their charter year. Someone else had to step in, not prepared, of course. And this club atrophied down to 14 members. It chartered at 25. Back then, that was the threshold. And one courageous president, she was one of the charter members, she went around the year she was president-elect, and she sat down in front of every member, and she said, are you with me or not? And those that opted in put this club back together, assisted by another charter member who followed her, now is a past district governor. And the two of them together put this club back together, got it up into critical mass, then started growing it on the basis of a large, iconic project that they've been doing now for the last 15 years. And today, this club is 41 members. You can get from 14 to 41. It takes intentionality, and it takes throwing off this small club mentality. Now, this club, during this time, their tagline was the little club that does, the little club that does. And I started kidding them after this started happening. I said, y'all are going to have to change this to the little club that got big. They hardly call themselves a little club anymore. Here's a club. The president-elect heard exactly this message in January of 2015 when their club was at 13 members. Said to himself, Terry, you might be right about that. Went back home. They actually invited me down at the southwest part of the state. They invited me down to do this as a program. And in the course of about 2 years, had themselves up to a critical mass of 23 members, and they're now within striking range of 30. Here's another club, same story, managed their way down to 22 and then later to 24. heard the same message, same date time frame. It was actually worse than this because once upon a time, only 8 years before, they were at 40 members. And they recovered their way back to somewhere north of 30 and then settled out at 30 in the course of about 3 years. This can be fixed. So what we're trying to build here then is not a membership drive, not a membership campaign. We're trying to build a culture of membership growth where people understand that an effective Rotary Club maintains or grows its membership moderately on a regular basis. A membership growth strategy is what leads to a growth culture. You can't move culture all by itself. You have to first move behaviors, strategies, and actions, and then the culture will come along once those are successful. I can assure you that absent a growth culture, your Rotary Club will shrink. Now, when I'm not doing this, what I do part-time, my encore career is small business coaching. And you'd be amazed at how similar a 20-person small business and a 20-person Rotary Club are, especially those that are failing. And typically what happens when a small business is failing, they have a shortage of prospects, they have a shortage of selling systems, and they have lost a growth culture and they start shrinking. That's because Newton was right. Newton was right about at least two things. One of them friction, the other one gravity. Those are the two forces that will pull your Rotary Club down if you're not applying some energy and if you don't have a growth strategy and a growth culture. I want you to think about this analogy and perhaps use it. It's there for the taking. A hot air balloon cannot be flown level. Physically impossible to do. There are no control surfaces, no avionics. The only control you've got is a chain attached to a propane valve that shoots hot flaming propane up into the bag. At that point, the balloon will start to rise until it starts cooling off, and then it will start to shrink. It's just steadily either rising or shrinking, one or the other. It's not flying level. Now, the default, of course, is descent. And in the balloon business, that's known as premature contact with terrain, not where you want to be. The other part of this analogy that works is that it requires the addition of energy. It requires the addition of energy to make a Rotary Club grow or to make a small business grow. They will not do it on their own. Now, in case you weren't convinced by the individual case studies I showed you before, here's one to consider. This is a case study about a district. And this is a district that I was doing a new set of MGI reports, Membership Growth Index reports. I went to RI to get the data, asked for 5 years. Nora gave me 15 years of data. That goes back to 2004. That's as far as their systems reach. 2004. So the data you're going to see is from 2004 to 2019. This district had 31 club failures in that 15-year window. It just took my breath away. I looked at this number and I said, I got to look at this a little bit more. I have to understand what the glide path looked like for all 31 of those clubs to fail in a 15-year window. Folks, here's what those glide paths look like. Notice from 20, a 2-member-a-year glide path. Notice how incredibly tightly these clubs clustered around that glide path. Even if you start from a higher altitude, say from 30 clubs on a 2-member-a-year glide path, it just takes a little longer, but you get the same place. Notice almost none of these clubs ever actually broke out. A couple of them had 1 or 2 years where they grew by a few members, but the dominant mode was a culture of decline that set in on these clubs, and over this 15-year period, they failed. Okay, well, maybe we got that behind us, or maybe we don't. The same district has 22 clubs remaining that are under 15 members. This is like watching a train wreck in slow motion. Here's what those look like. You'll notice the water line at 15, and you'll notice that in 2019, all of them were below water, and you'll notice how they got there. Now, here's what the 2-member-a-year decline looks like, and the fact is they weren't actually, this group of 15, all declining at quite that rate. It was really actually more like a 1 member per year bleed from, say, 20 down to 5 over the course of that time period. Notice also that only a handful of them actually started this journey at under 15 members, and almost all of them are smaller today than that. Most of these clubs, one from looks like something on the order of 34 members, figured out a way in only 15 years to unravel a 34-member club and get it down below 15 members. Only a matter of time until that club is gone, along with these other 22, unless we are willing to engage and see if we can help these clubs. You ever think about, why is my 16-member club only 16 members? Why is that? Is that in the bylaws somewhere? Why is it we can add 1 or 2 members a year to almost maintain 16? We can't add 3 or 4. It's not like we don't know how to attract members at all. We just don't set our sights high enough, and we just don't do it often enough. Could we, in fact, just be victims of a small club mindset? Have we just convinced ourselves that we're small and convinced ourselves that we like it that way, not recognizing the potential pitfalls of this small club mentality? At 14 or 16, it only takes a couple of casualties to get you on that downhill glide path towards premature contact with terrain. What can we do in our community if we had 32 members? It's inarguable that a 32-member Rotary Club couldn't be more effective in its community than a 16-member Rotary Club. And it's also, my observation, a whole lot easier to run a 32-member Rotary Club than a 16-member Rotary Club. First of all, nobody has to worry about being president for the 3rd time. You've got a steady flow of new members, you got a steady flow of new potential leadership, and over time you build yourself a bench. So should we just rethink our membership mindset? Should we start thinking about ourselves as 32 rather than 16? Rotary opens opportunities, and the opportunities for you, I think, is to take seriously these challenges of small clubs with whom I don't think we've been forthright. We're so concerned over offending people that we're not willing to help them. Again, we're not picking on anybody here. We're not saying that small clubs can't effectively serve their communities. We're not saying that small clubs can't effectively support the Rotary Foundation. We are saying simply, we are seriously frightened for their future.